Chapter 3 of The Three Taps. A detective story without a moral. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ken Kowalik. Section 3. At the Load of Mischief. By next morning, Bredon's spirits had risen. He had received by the early post a confidential letter from the company describing Mr. Mottram's curious offer, and suggesting, naturally, that the state of his health made suicide a plausible conjecture. The morning was fine, the car running well, the road they had selected in admirable condition. It was still before tea time when they turned off from its excellent surface onto indifferent by-roads, through which they had to thread their way with difficulty. The signposts, as is the wont of English signposts, now blazoned Chilthorpe, 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 as if it were the lodestone of the neighborhood. Now passed it over in severe silence, preferring to call attention to the fact that you were within 5 furlongs of Little Stubley. They had fallen, besides, upon hill country, with unexpected turns and precipitous gradients. They followed with enforced windings the bleak valley of the Busk, which swirled beneath them over smooth boulders between desolate banks. It was just after they had refused the 5th invitation to Little Stubley that the county council's arrangements played them false. There was a clear issue between 2 rival roads, with no trace of a signpost to direct their preference. It was here that they saw and hailed an old gentleman who was making casts into a promising pool about 20 yards away. "Chilthorpe?" said the old gentleman. "All of the world seems to be coming to Chilthorpe. The county council does not appear to have allowed for the possibility of its becoming a center of fashion. If you are fond of scenery, you should take the road to the left. It goes over the hill. If you like your tea weak, you had better take the valley road to the right. 5 o'clock is tea time at the Load of Mischief, and there is no second brew." Something in the old gentleman's tone seemed to invite confidences. "Thank you very much," said Bredon. "I suppose the Load of Mischief is the only inn that one can stop at?" There was never much to be said for the Swan, but today the Load of Mischief has added to its attractions. It is not everywhere you can sleep with the corpse of a suicide in the next room, and the police are in the house to satisfy the most morbid imagination. The police? When did they come? About luncheon time. They are understood to have a clue. I am only afraid myself that they will want to drag the river. The police always drag the river when they can think of nothing else to do. You are staying at the inn, I gather? I am the surviving guest. When you have tasted the coffee in the morning, you will understand the temptation to suicide. But so far I have resisted it. You are not relatives, I hope, of the deceased? No, I'm from the indescribable. We insured him, you know. It must be a privilege to die under such auspices, but I'm afraid I have gone beyond my book. When I say poor Mottram committed suicide, I am giving you theory, not fact. The police theory? Hardly. I left before they arrived. It is the landlady's theory, and when you know her better, you will know that it is well not to disagree with her. It provokes discussion. I am afraid she must be very much worried by all this. She is in the 7th heaven of lamentation. You could knock her down, she tells me, with a feather. She insists that her custom is ruined forever. Actually, you are the second party to stay at the inn as a result of this affair. And the jug and bottle business at midday was something incredible. The band of Hope was there en masse, swilling beer in the hope of picking up some gossip. The other party, were they relations? Oh no, it's a policeman, a real policeman from London. The secretary, I suppose, must have lost his head, and insisted on making a cause célèbre of the thing. I forgot him, by the way. A little chap called Brinkman. He is at the Load, too. 1,000 pardons, but I see a fish rising. It is so rare an event here that I must go and attend to it. And nodding pleasantly, the old gentleman made his way to the bank again. Chilthorpe is a long, straggling village with the business part, such as it is, at the lower end. The church is here, and the Load of Mischief, and a few shops, here too. The Busk flows under a wide stone bridge. a performance which at most times of the day attracts a fair crowd of local spectators. The houses are of gray stone, the roofs of blue slate. The rest of the village climbs up along the valley, all in one street. The houses stand perched on the edge of a steep slope, too steep almost for the cultivation of gardens, though a few currant and gooseberry bushes retain a precarious foothold. The view has its charms. When mists hang over it in autumn, or when the smoke of the chimneys lingers idly on a still summer evening, it has a mysterious and strangely un-English aspect. The hostess, presumably identified with J. Davis, licensed to sell wines, spirits, and tobacco, met them on the threshold. Voluble and apparently discouraging, her idea seemed to be that she could not have any more guests coming and committing suicide in her house. Bredon, afraid that his patience or his gravity would break down, put Angela in charge of the conversation. And so delicate was her tact, so well placed her sympathy, that within 10 minutes their arrival was being hailed as a godsend, and Mrs. Davis, ordering the barmaid to bring tea as soon as it could be procured, ushered them into a private room, assuring them of accommodation upstairs where she could put things to rights. It'd be one thing after another, she complained. All day she didn't really hardly know which way to turn, and her house was always a respectable one. There was not much custom, it seemed, at Chilthorpe, lying so far away from the main road, and that you would have supposed that in an RAC, listed hotel suicides were a matter of daily occurrence, and the management knew how to deal with them, whereas Mrs. Davis hadn't anybody but the girl and the boots, and him with only one arm, and those boys coming and looking in through the front window. Disgraceful, she called it. And what were the police for if they couldn't put a stop to it? And the reporters? 6 of them she'd turned away that very day, coming and prying into what didn't concern them. They didn't get a word out of her, that was one thing. Though, mark you, if Mrs. Davis didn't know poor Mr. Mottram, who did? Coming there regular, year after year, for the fishing, poor gentleman. Such a quiet gentleman, too, and never any goings-on. And how was she to know what would come of it? It wasn't that the gas leaked. Time and again she had those pipes seen to, and no complaints made. If there had been anything wrong, Mr. Pulteney, he'd have let her hear about it. He was one for having everything just as he liked, and no mistake. Yes, that would be him. He was a great one for the fishing. Such a queer gentleman, too, and always taking you up short. Why, yesterday morning, when she went to tell him about what had happened in the night, he was as cool as anything. All he said was, "In that case, Mrs. Davis, I will fish the long pool this morning." Like that, he said. Whereas Mr. Brinkman, that was the secretary, he was in a great taking about it. Didn't hardly know what he said or did, Mr. Brinkman didn't. And to think of all the gas that was wasted. On all night it was. Who was going to pay for it? It was more than she knew. Summing up, Mrs. Davis was understood to observe that it was a world for sorrow, and man was cut down like a flower, as the sparks fly upward. However, there was them above as knew. What would be, would be. Of all this diatribe, Bredon was a somewhat languid auditor. He recognized the type too well to suppose that any end was to be gained by cross-examination. Angela cooed and sighed, and dabbed her eyes now and again at appropriate moments, and in doing so, won golden opinions from the tyrannous conversationalist. It was a strong contrast when the maid came in with the tea things. She plumped them down in silence, tossing her head defiantly, as who should imply that somebody had recently found fault with her behind the scenes. But she was not going to take any notice of it. She was a strapping girl, of undeniable good looks, spoilt, improved the Latins would have said, by a slight cast in one eye. In the absence of any formidable competition, it was easy to imagine her the belle of the village. So resolute did her taciturnity appear that even Angela, who could draw confidences from a stone, instinctively decided that it would be best to question her later on. Instead, she whiled away the interminable interval which separates the arrival of the milk jug from that of the teapot by idly turning over the leaves of the old-fashioned visitor's book. The Mrs. Harrison, it appeared, had received every attention from their kind and considerate hostess. The Pulford Cycling Club had met for its annual outing, and the members pronounced themselves full to the bursting and coming back next year. An obviously newly married couple had found the neighborhood very quiet. A subsequent annotator had added the words, "I don't think," with the 3 marks of exclamation. The Witherspoon family, a large one, testified to having had a rattling good time at this old-world hostelry. The Reverend Arthur and Mrs. Stump would carry away many pleasant memories of the Chilthorpe and its neighborhood. Miles was wandering aimlessly about the room, inspecting those art treasures which stamp invariably and unmistakably the best room of a small country inn. There was the piano, badly out of tune, and a promiscuous heap of dissenting hymn books and forgotten dance tunes reposing on it. There were the 2 pictures which represent a lover's quarrel and a lover's reconciliation, the hero and heroine being portrayed in riding costume. There was a small bookshelf full of Sunday school prizes, interspersed with 2 advanced novels in cheap editions, clearly left behind by earlier visitors. There was a picture of Bournemouth in a frame of repulsive shells. There was a photograph of some local squire or other on horseback. There were several portraits which were intended to perpetuate the memory of the late Mr. Davis, a man of full bodily habit, whose clothes, especially his collar, seemed too tight for him. There were a couple of young gentlemen in khaki on the mantelpiece. There was a sailor, probably the one who had collected the strange assortment of picture postcards in the album under the occasional table. There were 3 wedding groups, all apparently in the family. In a few words, a detective interested in such problems might have read there a picture, the incredibly long and complicated annals of the poor. To Bredon, it was all a matter of intense irritation. When he visited the scene of some crime or some problem, he was fond of poking his way around the furniture, trying to pick up hints from the books and the knickknacks about the character of the people he was dealing with. At least, he would say, if you cannot pick up evidence about them, you can always catch something of their atmosphere. Mottram had hardly played the game when he died in a country inn, where he had not been able to impress his surroundings with any touch of his own quality. This inn parlor was like any other inn parlor, and the dead body upstairs would be a problem in isolation, torn away as it was from its proper context. The bedroom doubtless would have a text over the washing stand, a large wardrobe stuffed with family clothes and mothballs, a cheap print of The Soul's Awakening. It would just be an inn bedroom. There would be no Mottram about it. "I say," Angela interrupted suddenly, "Mottram seems to have visited this place pretty regularly, and always for the fishing season. There are some fine specimens of his signature, the last only written 2 days ago." "Eh? What's that?" said Bredon. "Written his signature in already, had he? Any date to it?" "Yes, here it is. J. W. Mottram, June 13th to..." and then a blank. He didn't know quite how long he would be staying, I suppose. "Let's see. Look here, that's all wrong, you know. This isn't a hotel register. It's just a visitor's book. And the people who write in visitors' book don't write till the day they leave." "Necessarily? Invariably. Look here. Look at Arthur Stump. You can see from his style and his handwriting what a meticulous fellow he is. Well, he came here on May 21st and stayed till May 26th. The Wilkinsons came here a day later, on the 22nd, and left on the 24th. But the Wilkinson entry comes first, and that's because they left first, don't you see? And here is Violet Harris doing the same. She put her name before the Sandeman party. Look at Mottram's entry last year. He didn't leave a blank then, and fill in his date of departure afterward. You can always tell when a thing is filled in afterward, because the spacing is never quite exact. No, Mottram did something quite foreign to his habit when he wrote June 13th to blank, and quite foreign to the habits of everyone I know. You get these little ideas sometime. No, you can't have tea till you come and sit at the table. I don't want you sloshing it about all over the place. Now, what can have been the idea of writing that entry? Nobody wanted proof that he had been here. Could it be a forgery? Done from last year's entry? That would mean it isn't Mottram upstairs at all, really. We shall know soon enough. No, there's only one idea that seems to me to make sense. He came to this place knowing that he was never going to leave it alive, and consequently, he wanted to put an entry in the book which would make it look as if he'd been paying just an ordinary visit, and was expecting to leave it alive. People will never see that they're overreaching themselves when they do that kind of thing. It's absurd to go on such slight indications. But so far as I can see, the presumption is this. Mottram meant to commit suicide, and meant to make it look as if he hadn't. The date's all right, I suppose? Bound to be. No sense in falsifying it when it could always be verified from the bill. Landladies have a habit of knowing what night guests arrive. Let's see, then. He arrived on the 13th, and he was found dead in the morning. That's yesterday morning, Tuesday. The 13th was Monday. He'd only been here one night. Well, we'll hope we can find all that part out from the secretary. I don't much want another hour of Mrs. Davis. Meanwhile, let's see if we can knock any more out of that teapot. I'm as thirsty as a fish. End of Chapter 3. Read by Ken Kowalik. May 9th, 2023. Reddit, Ontario, Canada.